Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran, and in today's video we'll be talking about the best possible Azerite traits for rogues in regards to PvP. I'll be taking a look at all three specializations, and for this video what I ended up doing is taking a look at the ladders for both US and EU and compiling together a list of the most prominent Azerite traits that I see on certain classes and explain to you guys exactly why certain people go for them. Now, I am going to cover every single spec, and all three specs of Assassination, Subtlety, and Outlaw are different in the thought process, at least from what I've been able to see from the data. And it seems that for the most part, between US and EU at the top of the ladder, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But I'll also try to extrapolate on the video to give you guys my ideas as to why I think certain people are going for certain traits, and explain things like why Assassination actually loves their traits while the other two specs can kinda take it or leave it depending on the situation. Now, what I find interesting in PvP, Azerite traits are actually treated a little bit different than in PvE. In PvE, most people just go and sim their character, or they go to websites that allow them to show simulations of different traits and how strong they are by item level, or which ones are worth stacking, and they can kind of figure out what's going to be the best for their character. Most people just go for the highest item level and just take whatever trait is the most valuable for them. But for PvP, you actually have traits that it might be worth downgrading certain pieces of gear just so you can get that extra trait, because you have a lot more open-ended type of thought process and application use in PvP, because the combat isn't going to be you just hitting a training dummy or a boss for a minute or two or even 3 or 4. It's going to be you interacting with other players in very different ways, and there might be 1 enemy, 2 enemies, 3 enemies, depending if you're doing 2s, 3s, or even battlegrounds. So then you're trying to look at which traits allow your spec an actual gameplay change. So that's what we'll be looking at, the different traits, and you should really look at them not from a perspective of which one has the highest sims for raid environment or dungeon environment, but rather how can you apply these traits in a PvP situation, and if there's a moment where you can clearly, easily apply this trait in order to help you do more damage. The first spec we'll be taking a look at is Assassination. Now, first of all, I should say this. Assassination right now on the ladders at the time of me taking a look at the ladders, which was like between 1 and 2 in the morning, so there shouldn't be that much activity or people logging on and off and trying to swap specs. Assassination is the most popular spec right now on the ladders. And you can kind of imagine why. You did have Outlaw and you did have Subtlety nerfs happen quite recently, where Assassination really only got hit by 1 Azerite trait, and even not to the point where that trait is completely useless either. So a lot of people are playing Assassination because it's reliable and it pushes damage and it has a fair amount of crowd control for what most people want out of rogues. But also their Azerite traits seem to be really strong and actually change the gameplay a little. So taking a look at their traits in particular, we can tell off the bat that Shrouded Suffocation is leading the charge. Now, I know that they nerfed this trait by a bunch, but Shrouded Suffocation still adds a little bit extra to the gameplay. It allows you extra common points in the opener, which gives your opener a whole load more value to. To be able to open with a cheap shot into a Garrote and have 5 common points already allows you to go and rupture the enemy right afterwards. Or if you want to Garrote multiple enemies, you'll just stack up common points super quickly. The damage increase is pretty nice because Garrote on its own kind of hits like a wet noodle, so most people are at least going for one of the trait. But I saw a lot of rogues running at least one of Shrouded Suffocation, no matter what they ran. Twist the Knife come close second, and that usually most people pair Shrouded Suffocation and Twist the Knife together, or at least most of the high-ranked prominent rogues do, especially on EU. Twist the Knife on its own adds damage to your Envenoms, and you'll be Envenoming a lot. And if for whatever reason you get a crit for your Envenom, it extends the duration of your poison application by 1 extra second. So this trait on its own, even without the crit proc, is a damage increase, and it's very close and competitive to Shrouded Suffocation, especially on the item level. After that, I see people go for Scent of Blood, and this is where you really start to realize why the traits for PvP are going to be different than for PvE. Because Scent of Blood isn't a trait that really most people are going to end up running a lot for PvE. Why? It's because it's just not that good. It doesn't sim quite as well, and in most single target boss fights, it only gets a little bit of value out of it. Scent of Blood on Rupture adds you extra agility, where on one boss fight, single boss fight, it just doesn't do enough for you. So it's generally better to grab some other traits like Double Dose, for example, which is the last one. That's just a flat DPS increase no matter what you do. But Son of Blood in arenas where you can put a Rupture on a pet and where you are incited to put Ruptures on more than one target, 2s or 3v3s, you actually can increase the damage output for yourself. Whether you put it on a pet, whether you put it on a player, you give yourself back the energy. So you're going to want to put a Rupture on an enemy regardless. So honestly, the trifecta, the wombo combo for Assassin would honestly be 1 Stratification for the common point building and damage, Twist the Knife for damage increase, and Son of Blood for potential agility increases in 3v3 situations. Honestly, I can kind of see why Assassination actually likes their spec-specific traits. I don't see a lot of people running non-spec-specific because Assassination actually has 3 traits that are super valuable for the spec, especially Stratification. So if you guys are getting higher item level pieces in the future, be sure to look out for Stratification at the very least. The next spec we'll be taking a look at is Subtlety, and the first thing I noticed with Subtlety is a lot of people are running Subtlety with Assassination traits. This tells me that most of these Subtlety rogues on the ladders are actually Assassin mains. And if anything, maybe they're playing Subtlety for PvP or PvE reasons, maybe they were doing some 2s, 3s, but for the most part, these are Assassination mains, so it just shows you kind of how many Subtlety rogues there are on the ladders and just how popular Assassination is. Anyway, let's get into Subtlety. Now for Subtlety, it's going to be a little bit different than Assassination. It's not really a question of how can you utilize these traits in order to help you do the most amount of damage, but more a question of necessity. Subtlety honestly gets slapped around a bit with those nerfs by nerfing your Eviscerate and Shadow Strike and your Phantom Assassin Honor talent that allows you extra crit. It does put the spec in a weird position. So most of your Azerite traits I feel like are out of necessity rather than which one is going to increase the damage or increase the output or sway your playstyle, because a lot of them are pretty passive and some of them might even feel like they are kind of in the way, and let me explain that in a second. First of all, the most popular one is Blade in the Shadows, and this one is to account for the nerf to Shadow Strike. Now, most people end up running just one trait of Blade in the Shadows, but it seems that just about every single Subtlety rogue main on the ladder has a Blade in the Shadows somewhere in their gear, whether it's a shoulder, chest, or a headpiece. But everybody seems to be running that at the very least. Now, the other traits for Subtlety are nearly not as popular as some of the baseline non-specific traits. There's actually a lot of non-specific traits that people have been running, and for Subtlety rogues, I've been seeing people run the PvP ones, where they'll have a chance to proc a higher chance when they're hitting an enemy of the opposite faction. So I found that very, very interesting in terms of, I guess, how that dichotomy works. But besides the Blade in the Shadows being the most popular, some of the other traits that are worth considering are First Dance, which is kind of a, I would say a wrench in the playstyle, the Inevitability, which is a passive, and Knight's Vengeance. Now, Knight's Vengeance and First Dance do feel like kind of a wrench in the cogwheel, so the playstyle and the rotation might be a little bit less smooth. Knight's Vengeance means that on a Nightblade, you want to be able to get an Eviscerate ASAP to get the most amount of value out of that initial Eviscerate damage. And some people have been pairing that together with First Dance. First Dance on your next Shadow Dance allows you an increased chance for your Shadow Strike, Shuriken Storm, and Eviscerate to crit. So then you're kind of just trying to make sure that when you pop in Shadow Dance, you want to make sure you have Eviscerate to follow up next. Or maybe a cheap shot, but not a Shadow Strike or a Shuriken Storm, just to make sure that you're saving that crit strike rate increase, which is not a guarantee, it's just a rate at which the ability will crit, an increase with this trait. So that makes your rotation a little bit weird, because sometimes in Subtlety I would want to go for a cheap shot into a Shadow Strike, into a Nightblade, maybe a cheap shot, Shadow Strike, Eviscerate if I don't have the common points on the enemy. But with this trait slotted in, I basically want to make sure to have common points ahead of time, and I can Shadow Dance into a cheap shot, but I need to make sure that the next ability is going to be an Eviscerate, just to make sure I get the crit value out of that. So that can be a little bit weird, and Knight's Vengeance can feel a little bit weird to play, but again, as I said before, I'll say it again, Subtlety is kind of sort of popular out there, but it definitely seems that Assassination is the more popular spec by so many Subtlety rogues that I've seen that had Assassination gear, but were in Subtlety spec. And then we have Outlaw Rogue, and Outlaw, it's in a much better position than it was back in Legion, but it is definitely not quite Assassination or anything like that. That spec also got hit with a few nerfs, plus you still have the RNG mechanics that are still present in the game, so I could definitely see people stray away from that whenever they can. But the spec is doing good from my personal experience, but there are a few rogues out there on a ladder playing Outlaw, and I checked on forums too. It seems like most people really do enjoy the spec. It just hasn't seen too much crazy popularity in PvP, but it is there, and we do see Outlaw rogues from time to time at the higher ladder on EU and US. Anyway, let's take a look at the traits. One thing I noticed for Outlaw is there isn't a lot to your traits, but there's actually most of the time, most Outlaw rogues are trying to go for traits outside of your spec. They might have maybe 1 or 2 spec specific, but most Outlaw rogues have at least 1, 2, or even all 3 as a trait outside of their spec. So we see Deadshot here, and it looks like that one's popular, but Deadshot compared to some of the other specs is not quite as popular. So that is something to consider. I think the reason why most people don't go for Outlaw specific traits is because you don't really need to. Plus, most of them don't really offer you anything crazy. Deadshot got nerfed pretty hard, but it's still a decent one, and it's very easy to line up after a stun to get a between the eyes and then a pistol shot proc. Ace up your sleeve is really good because we do end up stunning enemies a lot, so to increase the damage of those stuns is going to be nice. Storm of Steel is a pretty passive one. You are going to get eventually a Sinister Strike freeze hit, so your next dispatch is going to do more damage. So all of them are very simple and very tame. Even Deadshot, triple stacking isn't even really worth, so I see most of the time people get 2 stacks or even just 1 stack of Deadshot. And then there's Snake Eyes, and I can imagine Snake Eyes not being the most popular yet, because not a lot of people have been getting into it. If Outlaw was a super popular spec, like Assassination, then I think a lot more people will be trying out Snake Eyes, because I've been able to get some interesting results with Snake Eyes in my time of playing Outlaw, like 15k crits and doubled crits back to back with Outlaw. So most of our health for enemies is about 100k, and a Sinister Strike that hits for 15k with Snake Eyes buff, which does take a bit of time to line up, is insane. But it also, if it doubles, that's 30k worth of enemy's health just from a single ability, 45 energy, and it barely took a global. So I honestly believe that a lot more people will be trying different traits and different builds if Outlaw was nearly as popular as Assassination. But I guess if you're someone who's an Outlaw main and you're trying to figure out, oh, what is the best trait possible, I guess this is good news that you can take just about any middle ground trait as long as it doesn't give you mastery, and that can be a DPS upgrade for you no matter what you end up doing. Or if you do want to go for an Outlaw specific traits, these are the 4 popular ones, and out of like 6 or 7 spec specific ones, to have 4 that are pretty decent and worth looking at. In all the RNG that you might get from looking up gear and RNG for mythic pluses, or even arenas where you have your mythic chest at the end of the week, to know that you have majority of the traits are actually viable, I guess it's a good idea and a happy thought. But again, most of the traits for Outlaw Rogue are non-spec specific, so it's good to have that kind of flexibility. So I feel that if you were to take a look at the 3 specs, it feels that Outlaw might be the best one and the easiest one to gear for. Again, because most of your traits are not crazy in terms of what they end up doing for you, but they're also not terrible either. So if you get a piece of gear that's in Mythic Plus Dungeons or in Arena PvP from weekly chest, and it's an item level upgrade, you shouldn't have any problem just taking whatever you get with Outlaw, because most of the traits you get are actually not terrible. So some final thoughts for the end of this video. Of course, Assassination is the more popular spec, and I understand why, but it does have certain traits that I feel like are worth stacking. At least Shrouded Suffocation, but if you can get that wombo combo of the 3 different traits from your piece of gear, or at least Twist the Knife and Shrouded Suffocation for that Garrote, common point increase and damage increase, I feel like that's going to end up feeling a ton better than if you didn't have those traits. So it almost feels like it's kind of necessary. On the flip side though, you have Subtlety that feels like you gotta take certain traits out of need for those traits. Like with Assassination, you kind of do need your traits like Shrouded Suffocation and Twist the Knife in order to make the spec feel a lot better and play a little bit better. But with Subtlety, it's almost like you're playing behind, if that makes any sense. Like your Shadow Strikes are not doing that much damage, your Eviscerates are not doing that much damage, so you're taking those traits just so you can have an increased chance that maybe your stuff will crit, maybe your stuff will have a little bit extra crit chance. And with Outlaw, it doesn't seem like your traits are really all that necessary. Like, they're not bad, and most of them are damage increase regardless, but they don't feel like you kind of should grab some with like Assassination, but you also don't have that crazy necessity that it has with Subtlety. So it's like a nice middle ground. So I feel like if you end up playing Outlaw, it is going to be the less gear specific. So let's say you hate RNG, right? You hate RNG with gear. You might just have to end up playing Outlaw, the most RNG spec out of the 3 rogue specs, maybe the most RNG in the whole game, just so you can reduce the RNG of gear, which I think is ironic in some sense. But it also does make it that much miles easier to gear your rogue and to be able to receive a piece of gear that's an item level upgrade that is also going to be, for the most part, an Azerite trait level upgrade. Again, as long as you don't get a middle ground trait that increases your mastery, because that will do literally nothing. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Hopefully this gave you guys a little bit of an idea of why certain traits are good for specs of rogues, and hopefully my I guess commentary on this gave you guys a little bit of an idea why I think certain traits are required or needed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. What traits have you guys been rocking with? And again, this is the traits that people on the ladders are using right now, so I'm just kind of going off of the data that you can see on the World of Warcraft ladders. So this isn't from my personal experience, this isn't from anyone's personal experience. This is just a collection of information from the World of Warcraft US and EU ladders of everybody playing on there as a rogue. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what traits have you been using and which traits you actually like for PvP or even PvE at this point, and for which specs. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see all of you in the next one.